I'm going to hand you to Kay, who is a regular speaker. She's back for the third time? Fifth time! And we love her, so please give it to Kay.
Thank you very much, Evie. And even I thought it was my fourth time until earlier today when I went, no, it's my fifth, because I am the elder nerd on the circuit, which is why I have this thing in my hand, which I think you might not recognize it. It's called paper. And I have my notes on it because I forget stuff. So yeah, it's my fifth time. And for those of you who've seen me before, you know that actually I'm rubbish, I know nothing, but I just fall into these wormholes of scientific research and I can't get out of them. So I come here and I just go, blah, this is what I found. So I'm not so much an expert as just a nerd. Just as a word of warning, so my previous talks included in a fight between the Ebola virus and an angry post-menopausal woman, who would win? Yeah, I won. And there was also, just to warn you, in the front row, when I did Dance Like in Electron, which pointed out the similarities between classical choreography and the movement of subatomic particles, I asked for volunteers to come up on stage and dance, and they were brilliant. And I will be asking for volunteers tonight as well. I'm looking at you, Ange. I particularly want to thank a few people this evening for this journey into sensorimotor intentionality, which, here we are. I work with a lovely dance company called Move Beyond Words, and they recently commissioned me to do some research on dyslexia in the dance studio, because they are a dance company that particularly focuses on dyslexia. And because of them, I fell into this particular wormhole. And so I'm very, very grateful to them. And because of them also, I wrote a poem, which I'm afraid I'm going to deliver at the end of this talk. So, and there's a couple of people here who know how ranty my poetry is. So yeah, you have been warned. Right, yeah. I have to start out, first of all, sensorimotor intentionality. I only did this for Lou, who is quite often here, because Lou criticizes me for using very, very long words. So, for example, I think the last talk I did was immunosenescence, which is the aging of the immune system, and she couldn't say it. So I just put this up here to tease her. So the first thing I have to do is apologize to all the Christian nerds in the room. Sorry, darling, you can't see, can you? Okay. My slides are shit anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Apologies to the Christian nerds in the room, and thank you to Tom for setting me up for in the beginning. So in the beginning was not the word. Sorry, St. John. Sorry, Christian nerds. And it's okay for me to say that because I don't work for the BBC, so I can offend. I can offend as many people as I like. And this is a picture of St. John, allegedly, who said, in the beginning was the word. And I would like to put out this call to all of you nerds in the audience. Can we please have someone to do a nerd talk on the history of the hipster beard? Because it clearly started with St. John, didn't it? I'm also not entirely convinced, again, apologies to Christians, I'm not entirely convinced about the story of God delivering man fully formed into a garden, or even a bog, Evie. I'm more of the ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. Does anyone know what I'm talking about with ontology recapitulates one? We've got one biological scientist in the room. And by the way, I was once a biophysicist, so I do have a bit of qualification. Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny is the theory that the development of the human from cell to embryo to 68-year-old bitch. Is the same as the development of the phylae, the other species. So we go from bacteria to tiny multicellular beings to insects. So it's almost parallel. The development of the fetus to the newborn is almost parallel to the development of our species. So I'm more along those lines than I am I'm just going to deliver you this Adam and then rip one of his ribs out and make a woman. So I'm going to be talking about how the development of every human begins with movement. And in those weeks and months and years when we learn the most, we're learning through movement. We're not learning through somebody reading to us from a book. We're learning through our own movement. And we're going to look at the types of movement that are observed in utero and then post-birth. So the foundation of everything we do is in movement. And then we come on to sensorimotor intentionality, my phrase for teasingly. And then comes emotion. And then comes what we call object permanence, a concept. I'll talk a bit more about that. Don't you just love these words? So these are the words that describe the movement of the fetus in utero and the movement of newborn babies. We've got spontaneous startles, primitive motor babbling, twitches, isolated movements, and general movements. Which one would you most like me to talk about?
Babbling.
Primitive motor babbling. I mean, isn't that just the most wonderful thing? I'd like you all to put down your glasses, your booze, and do some primitive motor babbling. Just do what you think it is. And I wish I had a camera pointing this way. Okay, just do primitive, nice one. Yeah, primitive motor babbling. Great. So when we ask postnatal humans to do primitive motor babbling, they tend to use their voices. But in fact, prenatally, of course, they're not using their voices. So primitive motor babbling, it's, again, I don't work for the BBC. If you imagine Boris Johnson giving a speech, primitive motor babbling is actually the physical equivalent of that. It's a sort of... it's the whole body just randomly moving around. And the great thing about it, very much like Boris, is it has no intention. It has absolutely no idea where it's going. So the wonderful thing about the fetus in utero is that it's doing all this amazing movement, and it doesn't have an agenda. But even though it doesn't have an agenda, it learns a huge amount from primitive motor babbling, because there's resistance, so it's got all this fluid to press against, and then it might press against mummy's tummy, and it learns, it starts to lay down the neuropaths, not neuropathy, about, oh, this is what my body is, this is where my eyes are. So primitive motor babbling is really, really amazing and very, very useful. It's a bit like dancing as if nobody's watching. But in the case of the fetus, nobody is watching, except for these weirdos that did this research that I'm quoting here. So they don't know that anyone is watching. They don't have mirrors, so they can't watch themselves. And so fetuses are amazing dancers. And also I come back to twins are really amazing dancers because they always have the response of another being, even from the moment they start primitive motor babbling. I do have a question, actually. Can any politicians dance? Theresa May? Didn't work, did it? Anyway, sorry. And what happens with primitive motor babbling is that accidental contact really leads to lots of learning. So what I'd like to encourage you to do is to primitively motor babble as much as you can, possibly, I was going to say on the tube on the way home, but you can't get the tube today, but on your way home, do a bit of primitive motor babbling and see what happens, see what you come into contact with, and what might you learn from that. I just want to come back to two of the other sorts of movement that happen in utero: spontaneous startles and twitches. So, would anyone like to hazard a guess as to the difference between a startle and a twitch?
Is a twitch repetitive?
Ooh, nice one. The response was, is a twitch repetitive? That is a good one. In fact, they are quite repetitive because twitches happen during sleep and startles happen awake. So startles vary a lot more than twitches do. And who knew that startle was a noun? I certainly didn't until I started reading this. It's not such an annoying noun as creative. What do you do? Oh, I'm a creative. A creative what? But startle is actually a real noun. So there are spontaneous startles and twitches which happen during sleep. Sleep, even in utero, starts to happen at about 3 to 4 months into gestation. And fetuses sleep for about 12 minutes, which is about the time they give their parents to sleep after they're born. And a twitch, as you say, is usually the same. A startle is very different. And the way I've been looking at startles, and if anyone ever watches squirrels, which I do quite a lot. Yes, you obviously do. Squirrels are great examples of spontaneous startling. You'll see their tail just flick up for no apparent reason. They'll just go like that. It's fantastic. So the more boring words up there, so we're still on the subject, in case you've lost me, of how does the fetus move in the womb and how does a neonatal baby move. The last two types of movement are general movements and isolated movements, rather boring titles, but anyway. General movements, it is thought that they follow startles. So if anyone is brave enough, I'd like you to do a startle for yourself. I won't ask you to step up here because I'm getting those looks from the front row, which is no way. If you do a startle and then you go, okay, what does that startle inspire me to do? Off you go. Just do a quick startle and then, yeah, nice one. Yeah. And then, oh, I've done that startle. I'm just going to do this now. Yeah. So general movements follow startles, and they use the entire body. So if you were to watch a fetus, it would have a startle, and then its entire body would respond. And they're very fluent. It's beautiful, actually. It really is like watching amazing dancers. Whereas isolated movements involve distinctive sequencing of body parts. So the fetus will move a leg and then an arm. And it's absolutely fascinating to see how that movement develops. So when they begin to move, the fetus moves its arms and its legs. And then it goes, nah, you know what? Those legs are a bit naff. I'm going to just move my arms for a while. And the arm movement takes over and becomes dominant until the legs are really left out a bit. And the other amazing thing is that the speed of the arm movement, even pre-birth, they slow down the speed of the arm movement when they're reaching towards their eyes compared to when they're reaching towards their mouth. So there is already this. And here's Ange going. She's, knowing her, she's trying to see how fast she can put her hand towards her eyes. Please do not poke your eyes out, girl. We don't want that to happen. So that's general movements and isolated movements. And let's move on to the big thing, the sensorimotor intentionality. Up until now, it's just been about movement, and the fetus does not have any intention at all. And then we get sensorimotor intentionality, which happens in the fetus, but also in neonates. And what happens is, oh, I notice something with my senses. And I respond physically with movement to that thing that I notice. And the classic one for a newborn baby would be, oh, I smell milk. That's mummy. So I'm going to turn my head. That's the first movement. And then I'm going to go. So there is sense, smell, there is movement, and there is a response, which is taste. Now, if that is all positive, then the feedback to the baby is positive. That's a good emotion. But the baby can't name that emotion. The baby doesn't even know what the concept of emotion is. It's actually a physical change in the brain. So, and there's all sorts of others, like if, like my son, good job he's not here, he was born during Carnival in Notting Hill. His response to reggae music is just, and it has been since before he was born, because he could feel it in utero. And there's lots of evidence to show that the type of music that you play to a prenatal baby affects their taste in music later in life. It's extraordinary. So this looks very neat. So the baby senses something, it responds by moving, and then there's a sensorial response to the movement. It's what it really looks like is a bit more like this, which is, oh, there's an exciting, oh, no, there's a thing, oh, there's a thing. This is just like me going down the wormhole of academia.edu, by the way. For those of you not familiar, academia.edu is the nerd version of Google. And it's also got the most passive-aggressive emails. You know, are you the case Scorah that published this report? Anyway. So the order is sense, response, and so it goes on. And as I touched upon, it's from here that we see the development of emotion in the brain before this creature knows what an emotion is. I know it's slightly creepy, but they have done functional MRI scans of prenatal brains as well as just postnatal. And there's a lot of evidence of the build-up of the same activity as you would see in a grown-up, in the emotion, the parts of the brain that register emotion. So emotion is registering before we know what emotion is. And I don't have time to go into all the detail, but there are bits of the brain that correspond to different emotions. There's quite a lot of crossover, but there are bits. I'm running out of time, so just to come, yeah. Birth, frankly, I mean, as a mother, it's pretty hard for the mum, but God, for the baby. You imagine you've been floating around in this lovely, quiet, warm place, and then suddenly there's all this other stuff, and it really puts the brakes on their development in all sorts of ways. So it takes a couple of months for them to come round to what this new world is. And it takes quite a long time for them to come around to the idea of object permanence. Now, object permanence is the knowing that something is there even when I can't see it. So I can't see the back row of here, but I do know that you're there, unless you've all run off because I'm so boring. But object permanence is knowing that something is there. With a very, very small newborn baby, if you hide behind your hands, they cry because you've disappeared. But when they get to a couple of months, maybe 3 months, you go like that, and they think it's hilarious. And you're all going to be playing hidey-boo in a moment. So they begin to develop the idea of things, but we need to be really aware that even though they had emotions before they were born, they didn't know what they were having. It was just a brain reaction. And last of all, St. John, I'm winding up now, last of all comes language, which is not the same as sound. So in the beginning was not the word at all. However, prenatal and neonatal babies do respond to sound. And there is some amazing research on the sounds la 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 la, ma 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 ma. Even before birth, those two sounds have the fetus going. So they actually have a physical response to la la and mama. And when they start to say mama, and all of us mothers go, oh, sweet, he knows who I am, No, he doesn't. It's just one of those reflexive, oh yeah, making myself say that. Language comes much later. Language is about expressing things so that others can understand, something that I clearly have never learned, because I look around the room and you're all going, what is she talking about? I have a minute left. This is pretty good timing. My plea to you is to be more baby, to get out of the world of words and to start being more random, to really dance as if no one is looking, and try and notice what you notice. Notice what you notice if you move in unusual and random ways. Can you relearn primitive motor babbling? Can you practice going, oh, that's a nice colour of red wine. I'll reach over and take it. So can you really start using your senses? Can you be inspired by startles? If you suddenly go like that, oh, okay, I'll start a dance based on my startle. And can we, please, place experiencing emotions above explaining emotions, which I feel is somehow a healthier response to something that did begin as a physical thing. And most important, can we play peekaboo? May I read the poem, or have I yet do it? Okay, right. So I wrote this poem, as I said, for Move Beyond Words, and it's not quite as light-hearted as what I've been saying so far. And if I can find the page, no, I'll just read it off the screen. Those of you with a bit of classics training will know about chorus and lexis. Here we go. In the beginning was not the word. I did not thus define the sounds I heard, nor did I elevate sound and speech over sight, smell, or movement, recoil, or reach. In my unlimited early learning times, I didn't differentiate between screams and rhymes. There was no hierarchy of my many senses, top marks not given to your verbal responses. Words are not my power to survive. If I speak to the ocean, will I stay alive? No. My response to the waves is to swim, not to shout. If I fall in the pit or the bog, I can't talk myself out. I must climb, reach, and pull, not argue or reason. Can I talk myself warm in this inclement season? No. Faced with this storm, I must lean, turn, take cover, seek secure, solid shelter, perhaps the arms of another. I feel safe in embrace more than chatter or discourse. Sense, motion, emotion, and then the word. Forced in from outside, this uninvited dictatorial invader, it occupies my supple frame, this movement violator. These words that dominate our world are not the answer. They have become weapons in the war against the dancers, the ones who choose through subtle moves to tell their vital, move beyond words truths. Now, in these urgent elder years, I seek to fulfill that potential I have not yet reached, to return to my newborn, boundless creativity. I will use first movement, feeling, sensitivity. Let words come last. And when even loved ones' names escape me, as they will, as long as movement remains, I'm still me. But when my sense, response, and dance are gone, when chorus leaves me, then my time is done.
Wonderful as always. Do we have any questions? Any questions?
I think you skipped over the slide, but I was curious as to
The timing.
the timing when this starts happening.
Yes. So the question is, curious about the timing of when all the senses come into place. So if I may, I'll just flick back because I knew I was running out of time. So this is when the senses begin to be set in the fetus and postnatally. So tactile touch obviously starts at about 7 weeks and is complete by 32 weeks. So you can all read as well as I can. Vestibular, just to be clear, vestibular is not hearing, it's the balance sense, which I never thought was a sense before until I started reading them. So there you go, that's the order. And the interesting one is that our visual sense is the latest to develop. And babies that are born prematurely quite often have problems with seeing. Any other questions? Yeah.
To what extent do you get the same things in animals? And do they do this more so that when they're born they can just start running, or do they do it less?
And so the question is, to what extent do we get this with other animals? And I'm not sure if there's any research been done on magnetic resonance scanning of animal brains in utero. I'm sure there has been some done. But the difference is clearly that they continue to be sensorimotor for much longer than we do, because they don't have people trying to read them books and force them to learn to read. So I would say they continue being sensorimotor for much longer.
There was one in the back.
Hello. I was interested when you said that one of the sounds they use, mama, and the implications that has in the fact that in almost every language, mama is the word for female parent. Ima, mama, whatever. And I wonder if you think that has any implications on linguistic studies in terms of how far emotions control language and how far language controls emotions. Because people often think that language control the concepts that we can language can control the concepts we understand, but if such an important word has come from our instinctive emotions and the ability to speak, I don't know.
Right. So I'm going to try to paraphrase your amazing question, which is the beginning of another Nerd Nite, I think. So the question is, to what extent is this the importance of the sound ma ma ma? To what extent does sound dictate emotion, or is it emotion to sound, or is it sound to emotion? I think it's a really interesting area, and I was thinking about it a lot. I think there's also a feminist perspective on this as well, but I don't know the answer, but I do love the question. Thank you very much.
I think it's a different field, actually, so I apologise.
No, not at all. It was a great question. It's the whole, now look what you've done, I'll be looking that up. I think I saw another hand. Yes. Oh, it was you. Here comes trouble, Rob.
My question is, some children and adults experience sense differently. Did you encounter any of that in your research? Was there any evidence of differences in the experiences, and do they have consequences?
So the question is, some children and adults experience sense differently, and did I come across any data on how that impacts their development or things later on?
I mean, was there diversity?
Yeah.
Were there differences noted, and were there any consequences?
Yeah, so it's about, what are the consequences, what are the differences, and in terms of neurodiversity or any other diversity. I did start to look, because Movement Beyond Words, we also touch on autism, and there appears to be a different route from sense to emotion in people with different sense abilities, not sensibilities, sense abilities. So the emotion set up by different senses and different responses is different in different people, but yeah, I don't know how it pans out.
Any more questions?
I think I've been up here long enough.
No, well, in that case, Please, big
Thank
round of
you.
applause for Kate.